Hello, this is Professor Kuehn, and I'm continuing my lecture on Newton's Principia. This is from Book 1, Section 2. We've been talking about his Proposition 4, or Theorem 4, and you might recall that what we've been discussing is Newton is working up to develop his universal law of gravitation, but in order to do so, he needs to develop some relationships between forces and motion of objects moving in circular orbits. So this is a little bit mathematical, but bear with me as I kind of go through this proposition and the corollaries. This will pay off in the end. So last time we talked about if we consider two objects going in circular orbits at constant speed, but these two orbits are perhaps different speeds than one another. These two orbits have different radii. The one is capital R, the one is little r, and we consider some small time interval delta t. So during a time interval delta t, this one will have moved through a certain arc length, that's that capital arc length, and this one will have moved through this small arc length right here during this time. And what we had shown is that in order to move in that orbit and for this one to move in that orbit, there must be a centripetal force holding it in orbit. And also notice that the ratio of those two forces go as the arc length squared over the radius of the respective orbits. So that's what we had arrived at last time. Let me make one other comment before I talk about the corollaries of this proposition. You might recall in that proof that we had considered a time interval delta t, and then within the course of proving this statement right here, we had assumed that delta t was a very small time interval. We used that in one of the steps of our derivation. So you might think that this law only applies for very tiny time intervals. But as it ends up, that's not the case. Why is that? Because although we introduced a small time interval delta t, in the end, this formula does not have delta t anywhere in it. It actually canceled out from the numerator and denominator in the course of the derivation. And so this formula does not depend in any way on this being a small time interval. So for instance, if we let the time interval be long, like let's say a second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds, so the arc length is long, we could still measure that arc length and the radius of orbit, find the ratios, and that would tell us the ratio of the forces that are holding these two objects in orbit. Okay, having said that, let me go on to talk about the corollaries that Newton talks about in the context of Proposition 4, Theorem 4. These, by the way, are related to the lab experiment. So the force and rotation lab, we are going to be verifying some of these corollaries for rotating objects. So let me state what the various corollaries are. So first of all, corollary 1. All of these are dependent or based on this formula. And in fact, they're kind of different permutations of this formula. So the first one, he claims that if two objects are in orbit, the ratio of their centripetal forces can be written as the ratio of their velocities divided by their radii of orbit. So in other words, if this one right here is traveling around with a velocity capital V, and this one is traveling around with a velocity little v, and this one has a radius capital R, and this one has a radius little r, this formula right here, that's in orange, can be rewritten in this form. So this is basically another way of writing this formula. So how do we know this? How can we demonstrate this? Well, it's actually pretty easy to demonstrate this, because if we think about, notice in this formula we have a ratio of the arc lengths squared. So if we think about arc length in the big circle squared over the arc length in the little circle squared. What is that distance? Well, a distance when something's moving at a constant velocity is just its speed times the time interval during which it is moving. And likewise, this little arc length here can be arrived at from the speed times the time interval that it's moving, right? And so the ratio of these arc lengths can be expressed in terms of the ratio of their velocities. In other words, the ratio of arcs squared oops, I forgot to square these. They should be both squared. I apologize. There we go, because these are squared. So the ratio of the arc length squared is the same as the ratio of the velocities squared. And that's exactly what we're doing here in order to arrive at this formula. So you can write the ratio of the forces as the ratio of v squared over r, where velocity is the speed that they're rotating around, and again, r is the radius of the orbit. By the way, maybe I'll say one other thing about this formula. Here it's written as a ratio, but as usual, when we talk about ratios, it has implications about how you can write things as proportionality. So what this is essentially saying is that the force required to hold something in a circular orbit, that is a centripetal force, is proportional to the square of the velocity divided by the radius. So whenever you have something in a circular orbit of radius r moving at speed v, there must be a centripetal force that's proportional to these. Okay. This will come up a little bit later, so let me just mention this right now. Technically speaking, using Newton's second law, since the force is equal to the mass times the acceleration, we will eventually notice that this force, which is proportional to v squared r over r, this quantity right here is in fact the centripetal acceleration. The centripetal acceleration is v squared over r. This is what Newton refers to as the accelerative quantity of centripetal force. I know we now call it the centripetal acceleration. This is what we call it nowadays, the centripetal acceleration, A sub c, but Newton called it the accelerative quantity of centripetal force. This was back in his definitions. You might recall in the definitions at the very beginning of book 1, he talked about this accelerative quantity of centripetal force. This is what he's mentioning here, okay? So these are going to be good things to keep in mind. All right, that is corollary 1. What about corollary 2? What does corollary 2 say? He says that, well, this quantity here, the orange formula, kind of our base formula, can be written in another way. It can be written as being proportional to the ratio of the radii and inversely proportional to the times of orbit squared. Okay, so in this formula, t equals orbital time, that is the time to go around the entire circle, orbital time for small circle, or small orbit, and capital T is the orbital time for the big circle. Okay, so he's going to claim that you can write the ratio of the centripetal forces in this way as well. How do we know that? Well, this actually isn't so hard to figure out either. Once again, just like here we were changing variables, this involves a change of variables too. How do we know this? So how? Let me get rid of these so they're not in the way. Well, remember that when something is going in a circle, its velocity is going to be the distance it travels divided by the time it travels. And what's the distance around a whole circle? It's 2 pi times the radius, that's the circumference, and the time of orbit is the orbital time. So that's the speed, right? And likewise, for our little velocity, the velocity of the thing going around in the small orbit, it's 2 pi times little r over little t. And what we can do is we can just plug these two formulas in for these velocities. So let's go ahead and do that. Equals 2 pi capital R over time squared over r in the numerator, and in the denominator 2 pi times little r over little t squared over little r. You'll see that the 2 pi's cancel out. You'll have an r squared in the numerator and an r in the denominator. So some of those cancel out. You end up getting r over r, and you have a 1 over capital T squared in the numerator, which makes t squared in the denominator and t squared in the numerator. So there we have it. We have that formula. What we're basically saying is if we measure the time of orbit for an object going around here and the time of orbit for an object going around here, that's what those times are, and we know the radii of the orbit, we can make a conclusion about the strength of the centripetal forces that are holding them in orbit. Okay, and maybe I should just emphasize this. We're always talking about centripetal forces, so I'm going to go ahead and put a little sub C right here to remind us that these are all centripetal forces that we're discussing, the forces that are required to hold objects in circular orbits. Okay. All right, there we go. We have corollary 2. And what about corollary? I'm going to skip over corollary 3. Let's jump right to corollary 6. This is an interesting one. Corollary 6. This one is a little bit different. Let me go back, make my 6 a little bit better. Corollary 6 is going to be a very interesting one. So what this one is saying is if we measure the times of these two orbits, and it just so happens that the ratio of the times of the orbits are in a particular ratio. They go as the ratio of the radii to the 3/2 power. He calls that the sesquialteral ratio. That's just some language used for the 3/2 power. If this happens to be the case, the time of orbit for this one and the time of orbit for that one are related by the radii to the 3/2 power, then the ratio of the forces that are holding them in orbit must go as the inverse of the radius of the orbits squared, or we can also write this as centripetal force ratio is little r squared over big R squared. That is, the ratio of the forces is in the inverse ratio of the square of the radii. So if this, then this. Okay, how do we go about doing this? Well, we already know, based on this base formula, we know what the ratio of the forces are in relation to the velocities and the radii. We can also write it as the ratio of the radii and the times. Well, what we could do is we could plug in this ratio of times here, And you'll notice that that's going to eliminate the time variable and you're going to get more radius variables. And when you cancel all those out, you're going to arrive at this. So I'd like you to see if you can check this. Check this. Okay. And this is one of the ones you're going to be trying to verify in your lab experiment. All right. And now let's talk about corollary 9. Actually, let's not do this. We'll save this for next time.